The events centered on the Ukrainian city of Sumy highlight a significant moment in the ongoing conflict and its associated international diplomacy. A Russian missile strike directed at the city center resulted in considerable civilian impact, with initial reports detailing at least 35 deaths and approximately 120 injuries among the local population. The timing, occurring just a week before Easter celebrations unified this year across Eastern and Western Christianity, placed numerous civilians, including churchgoers, in the vicinity. Characterized as one of the most devastating Russian attacks on Ukraine in recent times, this incident prompted an immediate reaction among the group of 7 nations, leading to the drafting of a joint statement intended to address the severity of the strike. This proposed diplomatic measure, however, encountered complications related to consensus within the group. The initiative among several G7 members aimed not merely to denounce the lethal incident, but also, reportedly, to frame the attack on Sumy as evidence reinforcing the perception of Russia's determination to persist with military operations rather than seek a cessation of hostilities. Information sourced from Bloomberg, citing individuals familiar with the diplomatic communications, indicates that the administration under President Donald Trump communicated to its G7 partners an inability to endorse the proposed condemnation. The rationale conveyed for this position centered explicitly on strategic considerations regarding potential future interactions with Moscow. Specifically, the stated need involved working to preserve the space for peace negotiations. This divergence necessitated a specific procedural step by Canada, which holds the G7 presidency. Ottawa subsequently informed the other member nations that adoption of the joint declaration was unachievable without the consensus that included American approval. This reported American stance presents a clear divergence from the apparent objective of the other G7 partners involved in drafting the initial statement, where some sought to use the Sumy attack to underscore Russia's perceived commitment to conflict. The U.S. priority leaned towards preserving avenues for dialogue. Such a fundamental difference in interpreting the strategic implication of the event and the appropriate response inevitably impacts the outward projection of G7 unity on matters related to the Ukrainian conflict, revealing differing tactical calculations among key Western allies. From an external viewpoint, the decision to prioritize potential negotiation channels over immediate collective condemnation following a high-casualty civilian event could be interpreted variably by the primary actors involved, potentially signaling diplomatic openness to Moscow, while simultaneously raising questions in Kyiv regarding the hierarchy of partner priorities. Examining the substance of the reported American justification reveals a specific strategic calculation. Prioritizing the potential for future peace talks over the immediate diplomatic act of unified censure implies a judgment about the relative efficacy of these tools in the current context. This approach inherently subordinates the demonstrative value of collective condemnation, often used to signal resolve, isolate an actor, or reinforce norms, to the longer-term, albeit uncertain, prospect of achieving a negotiated settlement. Consequently, the operational reality is that the mechanism of G7 joint declarations, in this instance, was constrained not by a disagreement over the facts of the Sumy attack, but by a fundamental difference in strategic prioritization regarding engagement with Moscow. Beyond the immediate failure to issue the specific statement, this episode illustrates the inherent limitations of consensus-based international groupings when faced with divergent national interests or strategic assessments among core members, particularly concerning high-stakes geopolitical conflicts. The practical effect extends to the G7's capacity to act as a unified signaling mechanism. If internal disagreements prevent collective responses to significant events like the Sumy attack, the group's perceived influence and coherence in managing international crises could be diminished. Ultimately, the situation surrounding the Sumy statement underscores the persistent tension in international diplomacy between condemning actions deemed violations of norms or laws and preserving the functional channels required for conflict management and eventual resolution, a balance notoriously difficult to strike. For Ukraine, observing this internal G7 dynamic following a major attack on its territory could influence its assessment of the unqualified nature of Allied support, particularly when weighed against competing strategic objectives like maintaining diplomatic overtures towards the adversary. The absence of a unified condemnation, regardless of the underlying rationale, presents Moscow with observable data regarding the operational limits of Western collective action, potentially factoring into its own strategic calculus concerning future military actions and diplomatic engagements. Therefore, this diplomatic episode serves as a microcosm of the complex interplay between battlefield events, alliance politics, and the often competing imperatives of condemnation, deterrence, and the enduring search for pathways to de-escalation or conflict termination. As a direct outcome of the reported American position, the G7 as a collective entity was unable to formally articulate the interpretation that the Sumy strike signified Russia's undiminished commitment to prosecuting the war effort, which was apparently a key objective of the drafted statement. This inability to issue the unified declaration is thus a tangible consequence stemming directly from the prioritization of maintaining potential diplomatic pathways with Moscow over the act of immediate, collective denunciation following a specific battlefield event. Consequently, the practical effect is that the G7's capacity for unified punitive or interpretive declarations appears contingent, at least in this instance, upon alignment regarding the overarching strategic approach towards engagement with the Russian Federation, establishing a precedent where negotiation potential can supersede immediate condemnation. In essence, the unfolding surrounding the proposed G7 statement on the Sumy attack reveals the intricate and often contradictory pressures shaping international responses to ongoing conflicts. It demonstrates concretely how the pursuit of potential long-term diplomatic solutions can directly impede immediate collective actions intended to condemn specific acts of hostility, even those involving significant civilian casualties. This dynamic exposes the functional limits of Allied consensus when core strategic priorities diverge, illustrating that unified messaging is contingent not only on shared values, but also on aligned geopolitical calculations regarding engagement with adversaries. The event, therefore, serves less as a simple disagreement over wording and more as a stark indicator of the complex balancing act inherent in managing major power relations during wartime, where the imperative to communicate condemnation contends directly with the perceived necessity of preserving channels for future de-escalation.